All right, welcome to Death and Praxis. This is the podcast where we find the intersection between death and politics, and boy, there is a lot of that.
Too bad it doesn't end when you're dead. It just keeps going.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, fucking A. All right, so brand new podcast. This is our first episode ever. So we're going to do a little introduction here. My name is Kieran. I'm just a guy. I like politics. I sing in a band. We do a lot of political lyrics and shit. I'm always kind of up to date on that sort of stuff. I really like diving into the hard topics. I like debating shit. And this is my partner.
I'm Charlotte. I consider myself a politics baby. I'm definitely passionate. I'm definitely trying to keep myself educated. But yeah, I'm a good question asker. I love learning, and my expertise comes in death care because I am a licensed funeral director and embalmer.
Right on. So yeah, the politics and death, the two things that are for sure in life.
Nothing you can talk about at the dinner table.
Yeah,
on a holiday.
Exactly. So this episode, we're going to be getting into our first and maybe most obvious intersection of those two, which is MAID, or medical assistance in dying. Charlotte, you want to give us a bit of a rundown on what that is?
Yeah, this kind of is about as bang on to the topic of our podcast as it's ever going to be. We're going to try to be more flexible with the topics in the future. But yeah, this one just happens to be a perfect crossroads between death, dying, and where politics kind of comes in to govern our bodies. So medical assistance in dying is basically the practice of going through a interview process, applying for and being approved for assistance in death. That would be provided by a physician or a nurse practitioner. So yeah, medical assistance in dying, it is also known as euthanasia. That was kind of the first known practices of it. And it is being practiced where we live. So that's kind of why it's at the top of our minds.
Yeah, so MAID is practiced all around the world, mainly in the United States, North America, Europe, and Australia. There are 14 states in which it's legal in the U.S., certain European countries allow it, such as Spain, Portugal, Italy, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, all with varying levels of restrictions and caveats and asterisks. There's a million different ways that the laws and the legality of it play out. But lots of interesting, permutations of it around the world. It's also legal in all Australian states and in New Zealand. And in most of those countries, they have varying levels of restrictions and like, hey, you can't do it if you're not, a certain level of debilitated, if you don't have a certain, quality of life standard or something like that.
They're trying to measure your pain.
Yeah.
They're trying to measure human pain in a way that can be politicized.
Yeah. And it's kind of crazy. There's a couple interesting ones. Like I was looking at Switzerland, for example, is one of the only countries that allowed it for non-residents. So there was an industry
which
for a
is
while.
Huge because to skip locations to receive a procedure that is illegal in your home country is pretty intense.
Yeah. So for a long time, there was a lot of people.
This one, you can't get punished for it after.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, a lot of people were traveling to Switzerland to have the procedure done, which was, kind of makes sense. If you can't get it done at home and you need it, that's where you go, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to jump into the meat and potatoes of it a little bit. I'm going to let Charlotte kind of take the stage and set a little bit of the facts and stage setting for, what MAID is, kind of how it's practiced, and particularly how it's practiced here in Canada, in BC where we live.
Yeah, I think this part's going to be dry, but it is very important because I think both sides of any political argument about MAID would agree on the fact that it needs to be well laid out, well regulated, and properly governed in a way that is protecting vulnerable people. The history of MAID in Canada, it officially became legal and was practiced in Canada starting on June 17th, 2016. So we are now around the 10-year anniversary that MAID has become legal in Canada. When it was first presented and when it was first starting to be practiced, it was only for people who were deemed to be suffering from a grievous irremediable medical condition and that their natural death was reasonably foreseeable, which again, a lot of these things are trying to measure immeasurable parts of the human experience.
Yeah, and that's where it like gets a little sticky, right? Is like there's a lot of cases where somebody, miraculously recovers from something, or they their life is extended to a certain degree by certain procedures. I'm thinking of people with like terminal cancers getting chemo treatments and stuff like that. And a lot of these laws are trying to kind of find a way to draw a line in the sand on whether or not, somebody's allowed to kind of take that measure into their own hands, right?
Yeah, which seems, kind of insane when you just think about it in terms of autonomy, but all other aspects of our autonomy are governed from birth onward. So it makes sense that death is as well. An important bill that was passed in Canada was in March of 2021, because unlike the original standard for MAID, which was that death needed to be reasonably foreseeable, which meant that it was mostly very physical conditions that were getting approved for MAID, March 2021 Bill C7 was introduced, which expanded eligibility to include people whose natural death was not reasonably foreseeable. So people with severe chronic pain, people can live with pain for a very long time without naturally dying. It is pretty insane the extent that our bodies can take torture, more or less, and the level of medical intervention we're willing to go into to keep life.
Yeah, and like it's one of those things where like I've known some people with chronic pain disabilities, and like it's brutal. Like you wake up, you're in pain, you go to work, you're in pain, you come home, you try to relax, you're just in pain, right? And so like I can absolutely see how some people living like that with no clear end in sight would want out from that. And yeah, like our country and many others, well, basically all others, don't have an out for that. It's not considered something that you can take your own life over, which I mean, I'm sure a lot of people end up doing even outside of the system, which is unfortunate and tragic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for me, it's about having the option. We want to do everything we can as a society to support vulnerable people, to heal people, to allow people to live a life that is to them tolerable. But that definition is gonna be different to everybody. Some interesting things, I think, when you were talking about international MAID, I don't know this to be a fact, but I think that to the rest of the world, we are like the MAID capital. Even though it was practiced elsewhere first, we really got into some hardcore regulation and law that allowed us to be practicing it very efficiently, very quickly. And something about our population just also kind of added to those numbers pretty quickly too. So I don't actually know like the numbers on that, but that's like the sense that I get from when people from other places talk about Canada and MAID.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one too, because I know like we've definitely been leading the charge in terms of the availability of it and whatnot. And again, like I think a couple EU countries like Switzerland and what was the one? There was another country that was like the first one to legalize it. But, again, they remain pretty restrictive. And like, I also don't recall it being that big of a hubbub here. Like again, I've been very interested and connected with politics, particularly Canadian politics for years and years. And we're at the 10-year anniversary, and I can't recall any
there
public
wasn't marches
debate,
in the streets to prevent it. I think it was pretty well received initially. Of course, there was always going to be corners that were advocating against it, just a pro-life kind of idea that is kind of blanketing everything. But I did feel like it kind of slipped into our culture pretty naturally. And it's only been recently that we've been seeing a little bit more of an uptick in people that are expressing very much to be against it. So Quebec is actually the highest in terms of the numbers of MAID provisions provided per year per capita. We are close behind, but in general, we as in BC, but in general, Quebec, Ontario, and BC are considered the major MAID providing provinces in Canada. They account for nearly 85% of all MAID cases that are provided in Canada.
Oh, wow, really? Whoa, Quebec, Ontario, and BC.
Out of all of our provinces. Meaning pretty much like no in the prairies. Like it's not happening very often in the prairies.
I'm curious what that works out to per capita, because I know Ontario and Quebec are like 60% of our population, just period. So
that's actually something to think about when you think about the fact that like BC is right there in behind Quebec as the highest. In Quebec, recent Quebec data indicates that MAID accounts for over 7% of deaths. So that is all deaths. So if you're talking about deaths in a region, even a single digit full percentage is a pretty significant number. 7% is a pretty significant number. And I think BC is pretty close behind that. Nationally, MAID accounted for 5.1% of all deaths in Canada in 2024, which did rise almost 5% in 2020 from 2023. So the growth is increasing here. And I can also say just working in death care over the past, 7 years now, I have even noticed an uptick. Definitely has to do with where I'm practicing, the type of clients that feel comfortable in a given space. But that uptick is tangible, it feels like, in our community.
Yeah. And, like it sounds alarming and it sounds high. And I think a lot of people would look at that number and be like, oh my God, that's crazy. But, something I was thinking about, I mean, recently, like we just lost a pet and like,
Captain.
Captain. Love you, buddy.
Pour one out for Captain.
Yeah. And you'll see my fresh tattoo of the boy right here. Just letting that heal. But yeah, like you think of pet deaths and what it's like, domesticated pets, almost 100% of their deaths are MAID, right? Because we
that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Like
pets are the number one receiver of MAID in Canada for sure. They outpace us massively. And which is interesting because something that I want to talk about later is the fact that pets can't consent to euthanasia. And we consider it a very humane practice at the end of a pet's life to put them out of misery.
And so like it's interesting too, because when you think of, the way that a life ends and whatnot, and there are, sudden cases and stuff and accidents and whatnot, but, the majority are going to be, relatively foreseeable, kind of like hospice care situations, people kind of getting old or experiencing,
we're lucky to say that is the majority.
Incurable deaths and whatnot. And, with pets, when we kind of get to that stage, when we know that they're, in that state where they're just going to be in pain, where they're going to be, not living their best life, living a quality life, we make that decision for them. And so, that number in another realm where we feel that this is humane, I mean, gets up to that. I mean, I don't know how many pets die from immediate or accidental causes, but I would imagine that the death rate for pets is probably 80s or 90s or 90% for MAID deaths, right? Because we try to beat the terminal diseases, right? And that's kind of a humanity that we don't afford to humans.
Means when the end is the end, and no matter what path leads you there. It's interesting thinking about consent in the MAID process, in how we regulate MAID, because contrary to popular belief, I think if you are in a place where MAID is not normal, MAID is not commonly talked about or practiced, or if you happen to be paying attention to certain groups that are strongly against MAID, you might think that anyone who is ill can say, I want this, and then it's guaranteed to happen for them. It's not exactly an application and approval process that's handled by like a government committee. So it's a clinical assessment, and it's going to take, months, depending on the person. It's very nuanced care, or at least it should be. It's going to be conducted by independent physicians or nurse practitioners. It's going to be practiced by nurse practitioners and physicians. The patient must request MAID themselves, which is a really important aspect of how the laws are written in Canada, is that, I've heard people who are against MAID saying things like, oh, the doctor suggested MAID when my mom was super ill and she was aghast because she would never choose that. I don't know how that conversation happened. I wasn't a fly on the wall in the room, but doctors should not be pushing MAID on people, but they do present it as a care option, just like they're going to present, radioactive cancer treatments that other people might think is an affront to nature. So yeah, you do have to request it in Canada. I believe there's a written request and a verbal request portion. And then you start going through the clinical assessment process.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are gonna like, be aghast at even the presenting of the option as well, right? Like, I'm thinking of just some of the old school attitudes. Like, I mean, we were talking about like just something irrelevant, like green death or burial without a casket, and I remember my grandma being in the room for that conversation, being like, "I would never," and
she clutched her pearls.
Yeah, exactly, very much like a pearl clutching moment. But
she didn't want the dirt to touch her.
Yeah.
But I hate to tell you, Nana, you can be in the strongest casket. The dirt will get to you one day.
So yeah, and like, it's that rough conversation, and yeah, a doctor, they're not allowed to push it. They're not allowed to, encourage it on somebody. But, acknowledging its existence can even be like an affront for some whose sensibilities are tough. But, I think that option there is important, right? Like, again, we just went through this with losing a pet. We had all of these options for intervention presented to us, and they said, hey, yeah, you could try this, you could try that. And, thousands of dollars, very low likelihood, lots of difficulty, maybe worsening his quality of life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, at the end, they did kind of say, like, and then, there is the option of euthanasia. And though it hurt and hit like a truck, for us, it was the right choice, right? And it was something that had to, it was going to be the thing that released him from the suffering, right? So I think it being there is important for people, and the more it becomes part of the public, discussion and public zeitgeist, I think the more people kind of get used to that being an option and stuff, right? Like, I think there's...
Yeah, the option is the most important part. No one is pushing anyone to do this, or no one should be pushing anyone to do this. It's about having autonomy over your own body, which obviously needs to be regulated, because people can be in distress. People can be suffering from certain conditions that impair their judgment. So that's why we have these governing bodies to kind of set the standard and make sure that these proper clinical assessments are taking place. There's no government approval panel necessarily. Eligibility is determined by individual physicians through these assessments. And something that I think is interesting in BC, I can't speak to other provinces, but MAID provisions are covered by MSP in BC. So if an individual qualifies for medical assistance in dying, our, what would you call it? Our BC healthcare subsidy?
Our provincial healthcare. Yeah.
Yeah. Our provincial healthcare will cover the actual provision itself. And of course, when I say MAID provision or medical assistance in dying provision, the provision is the administering of the drug that's going to cause death. So yeah. And then if you want to, another important thing to consider is that we have a really, what I think is a good set of eligibility requirements, but I'm sure a lot of people are going to hear this and think, oh, there's a lot of room for questions and nuance and kind of gray area here. So the eligibility requirements for MAID in Canada are that a person is eligible for Canadian health services, number one. That is probably just because we don't want to be operating under any other any guidelines that are different from how we treat healthcare in our country. You have to be,
Oh, yeah. And it prevents, like, this one's there to prevent the death tourism as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what Switzerland has, right? Which I mean, you could argue about whether or not we want other people to be able to come to the country for that. But, this means that, hey, if you're, over the border in the States and you want to have a provision done, you can't just come up here and have it done, right?
Yeah.
And
then death care workers like me would be inundated. If people were coming here just to die, that would be a pretty sad situation. You have to be 18 years old, which again can be a point of contention for people, because I think there's a lot of differing ideas of when a person has the adult capacity to consent. Like 18 is an age of consent in a lot of ways in Canada, but what is it? Your prefrontal cortex isn't formed till you're 25. So
yeah, and I mean that discussion gets into every corner of politics, right? Like, the second you hit 18, you can join the military, you can fire a gun, you can smoke, you can drink, you can, do all sorts of legal drugs, you can consent to sexual relations with people and all of these sorts of things that, in a lot of cases we're like, hey, you're still kind of a baby, but, we draw the line somewhere. And, in the States, that's 21. In other countries, that's 19, 16
and we
for
both
different
know
things, right?
18, you don't feel like you're a baby.
Yeah.
So like if you, like, it's hard for me to put myself in someone's shoes like this, but if you were an 18-year-old that is suffering from a terrible terminal condition that's causing you daily pain and distress, you're going to feel like you have the right to make that decision for yourself, I think.
Yeah. And again, like I could ramble on about this for a long time, but I feel like there's so many different caveats to age restrictions on everything, right? Like, I kind of wish 16-year-olds could vote. And like, that's a big one for me.
16-year-olds, but yeah, you can't say that.
But yeah, well, exactly, right?
Nothing.
And I think about myself at 16 and I was like, okay, yeah, like, again, bit of a politics nerd, social studies class was huge for me. I was like, debate king, and I would have loved to be able to vote. And I think that my vote at 16 would have improved things. It would have mattered.
Yeah.
But we set that cutoff, right? And
there's no cap
also,
on voting, but I'm going to bet that like a 16-year-old is going to be more informed on current politics than a 99-year-old in a care home.
Yeah. And then you get to the inverse of that of like smoking. Well, probably shouldn't be smoking at 18. I mean, most people find a way when they want to, right?
You're kind of going to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, I could go down a rabbit hole on what I believe about, consent and legality of that sort of stuff. But
so grass on the field?
Oh, no.
We're not talking
We're
about that.
not ANCAPs.
We're not talking about
shit.
the age of consent today.
Yeah.
But okay, so 18-year-olds, which sometimes are babies but legally are adults and can decide to participate in the MAID process. Another eligibility requirement for having a MAID procedure in Canada is that you have to have decision-making capacity. And this actually follows through the whole process, which can be tricky because people who are navigating this are fluctuating between different levels of pain, different levels of capacity in all different senses. They are ill. So what does this mean, right? It means that you have to be providing consent at the beginning of this process. And then there is a literal last question before MAID is administered to a patient. And that is the final consent that you have to be able to give as well. So this makes one of the more common diseases in old age, which is like dementia, very difficult to get approved for MAID because consent is a very important part of it.
Yeah, and that's, that process, I imagine, probably has a ton of implications, right? Because even if you commit to it early, when you first find out that your memory is going and you say, okay, I don't want to live through dementia, I would like to have this procedure done. Well, 3 weeks later, when you're in the chair, you could just have an episode. You could not know where you are. You could forget that you said that, right? And then, you end up in this position of kind of dueling states of consciousness, right? There's a part of you that slips back to thinking that you're 25 years old and you go, why would I want to die? I feel great. And then immediately you're back in the body of an 80-year-old.
I've got a baseball game tomorrow with a League of Dreams, I can't possibly proceed with this.
Yeah. And, in order to do this ethically, you kind of need to lean on the person's state at the time of the procedure. But, and like how many problems would be introduced if you added a pre-signed consent into it, right? If you said, yeah, kill me in 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks later you say, no. And they say, but we got the form, so
that's not going to work.
Yeah. So that doesn't work. And so, it gets into all these sticky situations. And I can't imagine what certain families go through where, again, if you don't get to it early enough or when you're dealing with impaired states of mental being, what that consent process would look like.
Or when mental illness is involved and your family, your closest circle could disagree with your capacity to consent. which, you know, is kind of a funny thing to even say because consent should be up to the individual. But, you know, we've all been incapacitated by whether it's illnesses or mental illness or, just life.
Yeah. And like, you know, and this also gets into the intersectionality of it too, right? Where you can have multiple, multiple things going on with you at the same time, right? You could be mentally ill, but also have a terminal condition. You could be, in a state of constant pain from a chronic pain disorder or something like that. And due to that, have anxiety about being able to, reach out and, so we have all these cases.
You can have cancer and schizophrenia.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
That is a, an extreme kind of hyperbolic example, but that's how I like to talk to people about it. Is in reality, you can be incapacitated mentally in and out of states of consciousness and also have a debilitating physical, foreseeable natural death that would qualify you for MAID in Canada.
Yeah. And so that ability to give informed consent, like it feels like it's necessary, but also, can lead to a lot of ugly situations like that where, like you said, somebody with cancer and schizophrenia might be disqualified from it because they can't give the consent and therefore they're consigned to, a slow and potentially painful death, right?
Interesting. Yeah. So the MAID process in BC, that's all I can really speak on because that's what I obviously see being practiced. I work in death care. I am not part of the MAID assessment. I am not part of the MAID procedure, but what I do see are the spaces where MAID is provided because I am working with people to arrange for the transportation of their bodies after MAID is provided. So that's where I kind of have experience in seeing different types of cases. So in BC, patients have to request MAID voluntarily. We talked about that. It can't be suggested or, presented as, oh, here's option A. 2 independent physicians or nurse practitioners need to assess the patient, and that is separate. So that I'm not sure how they deem that. I'm pretty sure they need to be out of separate practices even. I'm pretty sure you can't have like a physician and a nurse practitioner in the same clinic. Both of these practitioners must agree that the person is an adult eligible for Canadian healthcare, has decision-making capacity, is making a voluntary request, and gives the informed consent. And then, of course, they need to meet the legal criteria for a grievous and irremediable medical condition. If the person's natural death is not reasonably foreseeable, there are other safeguards in play. This is definitely the area that I think gives the people who are against MAID the most fodder for sure, because it is a messy gray area. And that is for people where death is not reasonably foreseeable. There's an extended assessment, minimum 90 days. But who's to say, how long you should take to assess someone when death is not foreseeable? I think that's where it gets a little messy for people.
Yeah. And this is, it gets into one of those situations of how much should we be restricting somebody's ability to make the decision if there is enough oversight, right? Like one of the things I liken this to a lot is, and the political side of things is like the abortion debate, right? Because in a lot of cases,
the people who are against it are pro-life, regardless of what that means for the life.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I'm pro-life at even the cost of life, right? Which can be crazy, right? And so, in talking about kind of these assessments and these understandings of the condition, right? In the abortion debate, you talk about it in the sense of like, well, if you mandate a harsh review or enough bureaucracy, you create risk to life, right? Because a lot of these can be life and death situations, right? A mother could have a terminal pregnancy or something like that risks her own life. And if you say, okay, well, 4 doctors have to review it in 3 independent states and you got to travel in this and that, well, that woman is going to die before any of that happens, right? And so you get into this kind of ugly, process debate where you're, essentially outlawing something by introducing bureaucratic, oversight. And, in the abortion debate, it has already cost lives in the U.S. since the repeal of Roe v. Wade. And so when we go into this, like, yeah, obviously you definitely need some assurance that a person is of sound mind and able to dictate the end of their own life, but also by, introducing heavier and harsher restrictions on somebody making that decision for themselves, you can end up with worse outcomes, right? Again, we talk about somebody who maybe is experiencing early stages of Alzheimer's, right? And they need to make that decision. And if it's not considered terminal, if they have to go through a 90-day process, well, 3 months could be the difference between, somebody having the capacity to consent and not. So
you don't want to make that process excessively long for the people who do qualify and need it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. For example, I've meet with a lot of people who plan for MAID. It is very well thought out for them. They've wrapped their heads around it in terms of their own mortality as much as anyone is humanly capable. And then they pass beforehand. And that can be, a bittersweet thing. Sometimes it's out of complications. Other times it feels like, maybe it was meant to be because they had planned this pretty soon anyways, and their body was able to let go naturally. But definitely gets a little sticky. So if all of these requirements are met, then MAID can be provided to an individual, and a date is agreed upon between the physician and the person. A date and a place. The place can be important because hospitals should provide a location for patients to receive MAID. But I'm not going to name names. There is one Catholic hospital in our area that refuses to provide a place for MAID services, to the extent that there is a trailer out back that they offer to people.
Oh, really? I didn't actually know this.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it because they're doing what I would consider the bare minimum. You can tell that the people that are actually having to answer to the public for this have tried to kind of concede and been like, okay, well, it's against our Catholic beliefs, but as people who oath to protect people and serve people in healthcare will provide you a space, but it can't happen under the roof of the hospital, is the literal line they draw there.
Wow. Yeah, fuck the Catholic Church. I mean, just in like just general. Like,
that's another podcast.
Yeah, that's another whole world. Because I mean, like, I kind of just hate the fact that there is a religion so organized that they are a political body that holds, like, oh, what does the Pope think about abortion, or what does the Pope think about condoms? Who the fuck?
You know what? As a woman, I lose sleep at night. I lie awake. It's about 2:42 in the morning, and I'm thinking, what does the Pope think about my uterus specifically?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Like, if he could see inside me, what would he say?
Yeah, like it's so weird that, like, just even as like an abstract concept, if you're an alien coming to Earth, that there is just like a group of people that believe in a magic guy in the sky, and they have they have assigned a man to speak on behalf of Magic Man in the Sky to decide certain political issues. Like it's
pointier the hat, higher to God, closer to God. Is that what they say?
Something like that.
Anyways, we'll talk about the Catholic Church later. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting point, that a hospital should be a reasonable place to have this provided, but hospitals can even decide that it's not something that they're going to participate in. So that just adds an extra step for people, an extra complication. Even if you do get approved by physicians, you might find it difficult to find a physical location for this to take place. In BC, MAID is overviewed or kind of controlled by several bodies. The BC Ministry of Health, they have an oversight unit for MAID. This is primarily a provincial oversight. It receives and reviews any MAID documentation. So all of the paperwork that has to be completed when you're going through this process, they're the ones who do that review. They look for compliance with the federal eligibility criteria. They check safeguards, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, our federal government is involved, the Criminal Code and Health Canada. And then MAID is authorized and regulated under the Federal Criminal Code. So Canada oversees the national monitoring and report framework when it comes to MAID being practiced in Canada, and they issue guidance for healthcare practitioners to follow when they're providing this service. And then there's like colleges. There has to be people to educate the doctors. Doctors can also, I believe, decide if they are going to be a doctor who provides MAID or not. Thoughts on that? Like if you're a healthcare physician and you have, what do they call it? The Hippocratic Oath to honor people's bodies and take care of them.
Yeah. Do no harm.
Should they be able to say no?
Well, like
should we force them?
I mean, you can't force it. And there's all sorts of doctors that provide all sorts of services. I don't think chiropractors should be out there giving MAID, but they
shouldn't even be chiropractic.
Yeah, they shouldn't even have a job. But when you're talking about like when you're talking about what doctors should be able to provide this, right? Like, I don't think the service should be inaccessible to people, right? Again, if your doctor doesn't want to do it, fine, but there should be someone that does, and there should be someone accessible that does. And I think that's kind of one of the things that is interesting about the bureaucracy of this colliding with the ethics of it, because I think that is kind of a vector for attack that a lot of people use in this, right? Like when we talk again, relating this to the abortion case in the US, they say, oh, well, it's not illegal, but it's only legal at these certain practices, and you have to get approval from XYZ.
Yeah, you just can't find a fucking doctor.
And it takes you 9 months to find somebody that can provide an abortion, right?
A vet.
And yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting when the availability and the scarcity and the it can be used as a vector of attack.
Right? In the code legal and make it practically illegal.
Exactly.
Like it's just inaccessible to the point where it's not actually able to be practiced.
Yeah, and that's something that occurs all over the place, right? Like there's I could even talk about like voting scandals where they make it so like, okay, a certain person isn't ineligible to vote, but the hoops they have to jump through to get there,
they're gonna make it fucking hard.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of my concerns in this is we might see a pushback where yes, it's something that is technically afforded to you as a right, but they make you jump through so many hoops that it becomes impractical, difficult to pursue, a painful process, or one that is delayed so long that it just, never happens for you. So, the accessibility of it matters to me. And if, I think we have a culture that views it more acceptably, we're going to have more doctors that see it as a moral and kind thing to do, and they're going to engage with it more. Again, the more Catholic doctors we have, the more of a problem it is. So maybe we start.
Most of them go overseas to give kids glasses and then push Christianity.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't know what that availability is like, what the wait lists are like with things like that, but that would be my only concern on that front. Yeah,
I know what it's like in BC. So the Greater Vancouver area. Do you know roughly what our population is here?
Oh, I looked this up recently, but I can't recall.
Can you give me like a ballpark?
Like I think all of Metro Vancouver, including Surrey, Burnaby, all of that were 13 million. Maybe?
That's huge. Okay,
is that? No, that's too high. I'm trying to think. Maybe 5 or 6 million. I know Vancouver itself is like 800,000 people.
Add it in post.
Yeah, I'll figure that out.
Kieran, put it up on the screen.
Subtitle, I'll put it up there. I think we're in the range of 5-6 million.
So let's say, how in Quebec it was like 7% of deaths were MAID.
Yeah.
Let's say 5% here. I don't actually know if that's our numbers, but let's just say, because we're close behind Quebec, 5% of deaths for that massive population. As a death care worker, I see on death certificates who's signing the death certificate for MAID provisions. 3 doctors.
Wow.
3 doctors.
And they're performing them as well?
Well, yeah. These are who signs. So I'm assuming that maybe there's even doctors that will go through the assessment, but they're just not the ones physically providing it. But it is insane to me because I do work with a lot of individuals who receive MAID, and I see mostly 3 doctors signing. And I serve people all over the Greater Vancouver area.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. And I mean,
they've got reps.
Yeah.
They got street cred to this point. All the cred's going to these 3 doctors and all the blame, unfortunately.
Jeez, yeah. Well, and I this is one where I'd love to just like pull open the spreadsheets and start figuring stuff out. Cause I mean, like just thinking, yeah, like you said, certain population, certain number of people dying per day, per year, certain percentage of those which are MAID deaths. And then, you know, we're probably looking at thousands of names. And then if those are all going through those few doctors, you know, it creates a massive pinch.
Busy.
And then you have to ask, okay, how many more people are seeking their services, but they're just, you know, they're full up and they can't find another doctor that's willing to engage them on that, right?
Yeah. Exactly. It's hard to find a doctor. And this is all like all of this talk of regulations and the assessment process and the clinical process. All of this is written in a way where it's like, this is in the ideal scenario. Even you need to think about the fact that people that are navigate the American healthcare system, people that are navigating the Canadian healthcare system for something this big and this nuanced, they're inebriated. And I shouldn't say that because they're able to give consent, blah, blah, blah. They're, you know, whatever level of capacity, but you can't really, like, I personally believe if you're terminally ill with something or if you have a condition that is warranting approval for the MAID process, you're struggling, like whatever that means to you. And like I tell people all the time through work, grief is a great inebriator. I don't think people should be able to drive when they're grieving. We should all have to stay home for like at least a week when someone you know close to you dies, because grief is inebriating. And if grief is inebriating, and I know that, I imagine that having a diagnosis like this is pretty inebriating, and navigating this type of bureaucracy would be exhausting.
Yeah. And I mean, it's difficult, right? Because I mean, if you're saying that, like, yeah, like the grief of a diagnosis or of a particular condition, it could be inebriating, then, like, you know, is this something we should allow, or should we allow people to make that decision? And I absolutely believe so, but like, you know, it begs the question, and I do think that this is where, like, you know, a lot of this becomes very, very tricky and sticky. Like it's difficult to say what you know, what a healthy mindset is, right? Like you literally have to define what is a healthy mindset. And like, you know, we have all of these barriers in society for certain things. Like, again, you're allowed to be sad and drive, right? And even though like we could maybe say
I should be banned from being sad and driving.
Yeah. Even though we might be able to say like, oh yeah, that, like, you know, a certain amount of that is dangerous, we decide that putting pen to paper on that particularly,
it's in the hands of the individual,
hard, right? Yeah. And it's in the, you know, we have to afford people a certain level of autonomy over themselves to make the right decision, even when things are hard, right? Like, cause, you know, the slippery slope that follows that is like, okay, yeah, like, you know, can you sign up to do like anything? Can you commit to a contract when you are, you know, in a rough place? You know, a car salesman gets you on a predatory deal when
but
you're
my cat rough. Just died, and exactly, you want me to sign this contract? Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, there's a certain degree at which we just have to, like,
form.
You know, hand the personal responsibility back to the individual and say, hey, yeah, you can, you know, you can make your own decisions.
If there's ever
right?
a case to pass the responsibility back to the individual, should it not be over their own life and body?
Yeah.
So, yeah, just talking about consent. Another point that I want to make, this I promise might be my last like little legal thing, but an important thing to have towards the end of life, or just always, because you never know when you're towards the end of life, is a power of attorney or a health care representative, someone who can make health decisions for you if you are ailing and unable to make those decisions on your own. But even an enduring power of attorney, which I think has control to make certain healthcare directive decisions on a person's behalf, cannot consent to MAID for a person. So our laws have done their best at the capacity I think that they have right now, when we're still learning about this, to make sure that, yes, it is the person consenting the whole way through. Even if you have someone who you've given full control, like a power of attorney to control your bank account, your home, your everything, they have your SIN number, they cannot consent to MAID for you.
Yeah. And I mean, that feels right to me. But, you know, it's also...
But like you said, I'd be pissed if I had dementia and I consented and then my mind was not deemed worthy of consent by the time I'm like weeks away from a procedure.
Yeah. And you got to think of the flip side too. Like, you know, somebody with power of attorney. I mean, we've seen, you know, how many countless situations where somebody's power of attorney has been abused, right? Where,
Yep.
you know, maybe it's a son or daughter who just kind of reaches the end of their wits at caring for somebody in hospice and like, you know,
at home caregivers or just, it's true. Yeah. I think a lot of the messiness in this comes down to the human aspects of it, how we interact with each other, how we are a million different versions of ourselves in any given span of time. People are constantly adapting and changing and they're going to have different limits on different days.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, absolutely. Like it's tough to come down to, like, again, you can't write a rule that encompasses everything, right?
You can't account for every individual case.
Yeah. And, you know, the more you try to, the messier things get, right? Because
then you're blocking certain people and giving access to other people. Yeah, it's the framework needs to be just broad enough and just specific enough to protect people, but still give people the choice.
Yeah. And like, you know, not to personalize this too much, but like something I've always talked about, like I started my career working in game development, and I always kind of drew this connection between video games and politics in the fact that in a game you need to write the rules for exactly what can and can't be done, right? If I'm a game designer, I'm producing the outline of what somebody can do within a game world, right? You can spend money on this, you can't spend money on this, you can do that or whatever else, right?
Can't kill the guards.
Yeah,
it's illegal.
And in doing that, you end up realizing how much specificity has to go into outlining a system, right? When you hand a document over to a programmer and you say, hey, make this for the game, you have to be uber specific, because if you don't get, you know, the specificity of this or that, then you end up with unintended consequences. Yeah. Okay. You can't kill the guards. Okay. Well, you never said you can't kill the king NPC that gives out all the quests. So
what
now
if the guard is stabbing me? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's all these sorts of things that like kind of come out in game development. And I always liken it to law and, you know, like lawyers, because essentially they're just doing that for real life, right? They're coming up with those specificities and those laws for exactly how a country and a society
and
works.
Applying it to reality.
And interpretation is kind of the thing that is different here, because as humans, we can read a certain document and try to interpret its intention, right? We have a rule that says, you know, death needs to be reasonably foreseeable. Well, what the hell does that mean, right?
Yeah.
You can't define.
I would argue that
foreseeable.
Everyone's death is reasonably foreseeable.
Yeah, exactly, right? I'm gonna die at some point.
Yeah,
like, that's
I think everyone has
right?
accepted their mortality around, we hope, from 70 to 95.
Yeah, and so like, when you get into all of these things, we have a certain amount of leeway that is baked into every law, right? And that's what judges are there for. Is
loopholes?
Judges are there
loopholes.
to take the intention of the law and apply it to actual cases, and then we build off of case studies, and that's how the legal system works, right? So when you get down to it, we are kind of in the infancy of that in Canada, where again we're only 10 years in, right? So
actually it's so new.
Although thousands
it felt like longer.
yeah. And although MAID provisions have been around for these 10 years and there's been thousands of them, there has not been time for all of those processes to bake out, right? Mm-hmm. For that definition of reasonably
That's how you find loopholes. It's only by practicing
Yeah.
it. That's how you find gaps in the way that the legislature is written.
Yeah, and that might be kind of a good place to jump into the next topic that I had, which was getting into kind of the politics of it, right? Because a lot of what we're seeing right now, there's a bit of an upswell and a backlash to MAID in Canada, and I'm starting to see it percolating up in conservative circles as a bit of a wedge issue. What? Yeah, as a bit of a wedge issue that they're trying to leverage to get people to react. Right? They're looking for those issues that they can just
rage bait.
The rage bait that they can get their kind of pearl clutching audience to buy in on.
Yeah,
and a lot of it is cases where some of this ambiguity is in place, right? for example, one of the cases that we were made aware of was somebody who, I talked earlier about the intersection of multiple conditions, right? Somebody who might have a chronic pain condition or a chronic health condition, but then also have mental health issues. And there's a relatively popular case of somebody who had both, and they were approved for MAID under one, but not the other. And so that MAID procedure happened, and this person's family was very, very upset about it, even though the person themselves had sought out the MAID provision and was deemed to be of sound mind by multiple physicians and went through the proper processes and stuff. But it's being leveraged as this wedge issue to say, so-and-so had a mental health issue and was approved for MAID and blah, blah, blah. And it's become this big thing where you'll see the headline and it'll say, person with depression approved for MAID and killed by a doctor. Yeah. And you'll see, reactionary.
I would love to meet the person with a terminal diagnosis who doesn't have depression. What a ray of light.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so you see like pearl clutching parents and boomers and, conservatives going, oh my God, that's horrible. We're run amok with crazy doctors that are trying to kill people. When in reality, it's so much more nuanced, and it's just become this kind of like flashpoint issue. And I'm seeing this a lot, and it's something that I don't think that mainstream political discourse has really tacked onto, which is part of the impetus of starting this podcast and this episode. I've seen certain right-wing grifter pieces of shit. Maxime Bernier, obviously People's Party of Canada, #1 dipshit in the entire country. Aaron Gunn, who's a conservative MP here in British Columbia.
I can see the ad now.
Yeah, this dude is the biggest piece of shit you'll ever meet in your life. He kind of rose to fame doing a documentary about the homeless problem in Vancouver, and obviously having some terrible fucking opinions about it. Aaron Gunn, I just wanted to call this out. This guy has gone on record saying he doesn't believe residential schools were a genocide. He believes there's only two genders. He believes that transgenderism is mental illness. He is a fucking loser.
But he's got a platform and he's got listeners.
Well, he's an MP. He's part of Parliament in Canada, and which makes him even more relevant than Maxime Bernier, who is the leader of a mainstream political party, but doesn't have a seat because he fucking sucks and everyone hates him. This is even coming up from the US as well. I saw a tweet where Matt Walsh called Canada the most evil country in the world because we kill babies and disabled people, referring, of course, to abortion and MAID. Yeah. So, there's this upswell of reactionary sentiment towards this issue. And I think a lot of the ammunition that they're starting to come up with is coming from our country going through that process of working out the intention of the law and these loopholes and stuff, right?
Transparent as possible. Yeah. You should be glad that things like this are coming to light, even if maybe we don't agree with the party that is arguing and what they're arguing. Just the fact that these cases are being brought to light is a sign that we are investigating our own practices, which is kind of the most you can ask of any large governing body trying to navigate the human experience and life and death. And
that's exactly it, right? Is I think for them, the sentiment is that they just want it eliminated entirely. They want it outlawed. They want it banned. And I think that
life for life's sake.
Life at any cost, even at the cost of life, right? There is, I've got a point in our notes here of they're really pursuing this idea that MAID is murder. They're trying to angle it as a wedge issue. And then again,
way to steal the MAID is murder.
Yeah.
Chant.
Yeah. And again, similar to the abortion issue, it's preventing loss of life at all costs, even at the cost of lives. Right. And one of the things that kind of comes to mind here is that, I actually looked this up because I had a really good discussion with a friend about this recently. In every province, or in actually, since the legalization of MAID in Canada, suicide rates in every single province have gone down.
That is true. Yeah.
And you have to ask, okay, so if we were to outlaw MAID again, how many of these people need to just take it into their own hands, right? At some level, you can't legislate the human experience. You can just make it more humane, right?
Right.
You can't. Again, when we talk about abortion, if abortion's outlawed, well, you have a lot more just, accidental losses of pregnancy, right? And that's more dangerous. That causes worse health outcomes. And when you say to somebody, hey, you can't choose to end your own life, sometimes they're not gonna just accept that. Like, they're not gonna just keep living, when they're set on it. And, some might, but again, you're taking the dignity out of the process, right? You're forcing people into terrible choices where they have to do it on their own. They have to do it, privately. And it's fucking horrific. It's tragic. I mourn for the person that gets denied a MAID death and then chooses to do it at home later with, God knows what. I'll spare the descriptions of it. But yeah, their families, the people that find them, right? Like, these sorts of things are horrific. And
again, that's not every case,
that are
but
against
it's about
this,
the option.
Yeah. Functionally, the people that are against this want that. And, it's like, they don't have the logical capacity to think that deep, to get to that layer of understanding of the issue.
Cold.
They're stupid. They're fucking stupid. And I will put it on blast. Aaron Gunn, Maxime Bernier, Matt Walsh, anybody else. Eat a dick. You're fucking stupid. You're just stupid. You're just stupid. You're dumb. You're stupid.
Just try a dick just once.
Your
name's Maxime, for fuck's sake.
It takes kind of analyzing these issues by layers, right? You have to say, like, okay, you have to have a logical framework for this. Okay, I want to prevent loss of life. Okay, so if you want to prevent loss of life, what do you want to happen? Well, I don't want MAID to happen. Okay, so if you don't want MAID to happen...
But I also don't want high healthcare expenses.
Yeah, and you follow that train down to the other realities of it, right? Okay, so if you don't want people to be in these positions, then we should invest massively in our healthcare, right? We should make sure that people are healthy.
Flush
and
out the assessment process for MAID.
Yeah, and everybody should be getting
doctors.
Free yearly checkups, cancer screenings, all of this sort of stuff. Well, no. That's like, no, we need to privatize healthcare. You go, oh, you want to privatize healthcare, so you only want that for the rich people. Right. And they go, and it extends down this ladder, and you get to the same thing again. I keep likening this to the abortion debate, where you say, okay, well, what do you want to happen? You say, well, no abortions. And you say, okay, so you want people to have kids. And you say, yeah, okay, we want people to have kids. And you say, okay, so why do you think people are choosing not to have kids? And they say, well, the economy and blah, blah, blah. And and we go, okay, so you want to fix the economy. So how about we make housing more affordable? No. Hold up. Wait, no.
Hold up.
And so again, I think there's incentive structures that choose to impact, or that make these realities for people, right? Again, on the abortion debate, people don't think that they can afford to have a kid. They think the world's too unstable for a kid. They feel like they're not ready for kids because they're not in a place where they're mature, safe, their health is taken care of, etc. And when you wheel back to starting to impact those issues by making their lives better, by providing healthcare, by making housing more affordable, by doing all of these things, they're against it. And
cost, effort, and money and intervention. Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
can I touch on something?
Yeah.
You were talking earlier about, the kind of logical inconsistency of disregarding MAID as a valid option and kind of protecting life, even if it's costing lives. There's something that I talk about in my work quite often with families in a gentler context, I think. But that is that as much as human beings have the will to live, we hear a lot about the will to live. She was drowned by a shark, but she had the will to live that gave her the strength to swim to the surface with no legs, the will to live. People have the will to die as well. And I feel comfortable saying that because, again, I work with a lot of people at the end of life, and something that I have witnessed firsthand and also heard from many, many, many families in a lot of different ways is people at the end of their lives do have the ability in some kind of weird physiological way to let go. And we, in general, in the human experience, see those people as lucky. If Grammy was waiting till our last grandchild arrived so she could say goodbye, and then miraculously she died 3 minutes later. That is not rare. Like, that kind of story is actually quite common. And I think that it speaks to the human will to die. And I think that when I say that phrase, it's not, it sounds terrible like on its own. But what I mean by emphasizing that is part of our autonomy in the human experience from the moment that we're born. And so I do believe that when people have come to a point that they are willing to make a decision like that, it takes so much fortitude and shifting of perspective and this introspection that I think a lot of people don't even reach in their whole lives, to arrive at that will and to exercise one's own willpower is, I think, one of my deepest beliefs. So that's why I'm on Team MAID in most circumstances, as long as it's done ethically and that it's that vulnerable people are protected from making a rash decision.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's absolutely the case that, you know, I fundamentally believe that, like, you know, if you're of sound mind and you want to make that decision, like, I almost don't care about the medical implications or anything. Like, you know, in an idealistic world, like, I do believe in the power to choose to end your own life. And yes, that fucking sucks. And, like, you know,
hope you don't have to do that.
Yeah. But and I hope you don't have to do that. And again, like, I don't want a world where people make that decision, but I do want people to have that control and that autonomy, right? Like, you know, there's a lot of punk music that relates to this, right? Like, you know, I'm thinking of, like, Choking Victims' Suicide. Like, that song, like, is literally about the idea that, like, I should be able to choose to get out of here at any point, right? And while, yes, like, we should strive for a world where people don't want that outcome, I think, you know, forcing them into an existence that they don't want to be a part of is equally cruel or worse. And this kind of goes back to the final big, like, kind of political point that I wanted to make here is, like, the like, social murder against MAID, right? And social murder is, for those unaware, is a concept coined by, I think, Friedrich Engels, who was a German writer, who I believe worked with Karl Marx. My memory's a little fuzzy on it. But anyways, the concept of social murder is essentially when systems induce death prematurely or rather directly, right?
Discreetly.
Discreetly. And this was brought up a lot. This was like a talking point after the death of what's his dick United Healthcare CEO. You know, praise be Luigi. But, like, the situation there, a lot of people were saying, oh, well, Luigi, you know, allegedly assassinated this guy, shot him in the back of the head. And then we go, okay, well, why would he want to do that? And you look at this healthcare CEO, and he committed social murder against thousands, right? Maybe hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands. And he, through his company, through his methods, induced an economic and systemic way wherein people were denied healthcare, they were denied the ability to gain a, you know, solid quality of life,
protections are taken away,
and ended up dying, right?
Yep.
And so, you know, the concept of social murder is that, you know, you can be a government bureaucrat signing papers and be a murderer, right?
No blood on your hands.
Yeah,
blood on your
you
e-pen.
didn't point the gun, you didn't stab with the knife, but you did cause a death, however indirectly. And social murder can be caused by groups of people,
Pollution,
right? It doesn't have to be one person.
Companies.
It can be a group. And so, you know, like, this brings us back. I had a really good conversation with somebody about MAID, and the person that I had this conversation with is a bit of an advocate for disability rights here in British Columbia. They're a disabled individual. They're on disability benefits, and they've been through what it's like to not be able to work, but not be able to survive due to the incredible cost of being in society, right? And so
that requires so much self-advocacy.
Yeah. And this person actually had reposted something that Maxime Bernier wrote about MAID. And I reached out to them because I was like, that's a little odd that you're kind of retweeting Maxime Bernier. He's a piece of shit. You're generally pretty lefty. Can we have a conversation about this? And so we talked through it a little bit. And what it came down to was, like, they were saying that, okay, in a lot of cases, these in Canada, they're called Track 2 MAIDs because there was an advancement to the law that basically allowed
no foreseeable natural death.
It was the Bill C7 was it that that made it so that even if your death wasn't foreseeable, you could still apply for MAID. And this person's argument was essentially that since the introduction of Track 2 MAID, a lot of people have been choosing MAID in situations where their economic reality has made survival untenable, right? Situations where maybe they can't afford medication that our healthcare doesn't cover, situations where they aren't making enough through disability benefits to be able to house themselves, so they end up on the streets.
Forced to work uncomfortably
people
in
who
unsafe
are
environments.
Exactly, forced to work unsafely and stuff. And so their argument was essentially like, Track 2 MAID has enabled death as an option for these people who are otherwise pinched out by society. And my kind of counterpoint to it was like, okay, yes, that's absolutely a problem, but why is the focus not on solving the social murder, on pursuing
building
the fact
out
that
the support network rather than canceling out the option for all individuals?
And you know, the person I talked to was very like her advocacy for those issues has been outstanding, far in excess of anything I've ever done. So I absolutely like don't want to just be like, oh, well, you don't care about these things, because they clearly do. But it was interesting to me that this reactionary point of therefore stop MAID was able to reach even somebody who is so far down there, because we see social murder as such an unsolvable problem. This is the economic reality. This is the world we live in. We can't account for companies needing to make profit and therefore killing people. We can't account for an unaffordable housing market.
And we feel like we not only can we not account for it, we can't stop it. It feels unstoppable.
Yeah.
It feels unfixable at this point.
Yeah. And so instead of like that being the point of discussion, we react to an immediate
don't give people this option.
Yeah. Like we say, okay, don't give people this, right? And so again, going back to the abortion debate of like, okay, well, people are choosing to not have babies. And then we go, okay, so what about we fix the economic conditions? They said, no, that's fucking untenable. We're just going to stop and force you to have a baby in poverty or something, right? And that's kind of the same thing with MAID here, where, okay, if we have somebody who, say maybe you have a chronic pain condition, you live in pain every single day, and you can't afford to work or live a dignified life, and therefore you choose MAID, that to me is a social murder. And I don't think the answer to that is outlawing MAID. It is fixing the economic conditions that have resulted in that. But we see
bigger
that
ask
as such,
and less direct route, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, like that person might still choose suicide, and that's horrific, right? Like we're not making their life better by keeping them around without the option of MAID. Maybe there's an argument to be made that we're extending their life so that we can fix those issues down the road. But
if you're not fixing it, you're just extending suffering.
Exactly. We still live under capitalism, right? There is still this unending pressure to be as fucking like forcefully extracting of everything that exists, that even our disabled people, like the people that are in our society that are the most vulnerable, are being forced to be part of the machine, and they're forced to be milked for any labor that they could possibly muster in order to maintain this existence that they have. And when they say, no, I reject that, we are, locking them back into it. And to me, that's fucked. I don't know. So it's interesting because, I think I'm very worried about where this goes in the public discourse, because I feel like, seeing my friend who's a disability advocate get caught into an idea that like, hey, maybe this should be repealed. Track 2 shouldn't be in the public discourse because our country consists of a bunch of social murderers. It makes me feel really fucking hopeless, because like I can if this person got caught by that, how easily will my parents or grandparents or anybody, when Aaron Gunn and Maxime Bernier get onto a debate podium and say, someone was poor and chose to end their life, therefore we need to repeal MAID, right? And then we lose all of the public good that has been gained for people that wanted to end their life in a dignified way.
Yeah, and I will say that the general consensus, or a big point that right-wing people that are against MAID as an option or trying to repeal any progress that has been made, one of the biggest points is that the reason that the numbers are so high in BC specifically is because no one can afford to live comfortably here. It is something that comes up quite often. I'm not going to share really my personal opinion on that, because even though I do see a lot of MAID, I am very aware that you cannot judge someone's socioeconomic condition just based off of a few meetings. But, you know, the fact that we cover MAID by MSP might mean that's just because you can't afford to pay your rent doesn't mean you can't afford to go through with the MAID provision process. And even though I am someone that believes in autonomy and this option being available to people who decide for themselves that it is a valid option, it is a huge set of factors that contributes to what we would call quality of life. And a lot of people's decisions, or actually everyone's decisions when it comes to MAID, is based on, in a sense, quality of life. What does a comfortable life mean to you? What does a livable life mean to you? You know, is being on a ventilator what you want for the, you know, the end of your time on earth? Where do you draw the line personally? And it's going to be different for everyone, which is, you know, again, why it's hard to write hard lines into the law. But yeah, there's so many factors that go into a person's decision to receive MAID. And all I can say is that from my experience, when people do decide, I have not seen a lot of flip-flopping per se. And to me, that shows, again, just the validity of MAID as an option, because no one wants to make that decision. Like, no one in ideal circumstances and given proper, you know, health and wealth is going to choose that option. Most people will be like, fuck it, I want to live forever. But if you are unfortunate enough to be in a position where you see this as a valid option, like, people do come to a place where they feel very firmly in their decision and comfortable and grateful to be given the option.
Yeah. And, you know, I think, like, again, the dignity of it is what it's really about, right? Because, again, we're not like removing the option for MAID is not removing the option to die. It's not.
Can I talk a little bit about what dying with MAID looks like?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, in practicality, it's not at that one hospital. It's outside in the back.
Yeah.
That's the worst case scenario, I think. You can receive a MAID provision in BC at your home, at a hospital. Haven't seen too many at like hospice or palliative care units. I think you're usually moved to a main general hospital for that type of provision. Most MAIDs that I see happen at home, which, like you said, a dignified death, that is the most any human being can ask for, is being surrounded by family in your own bed. That's a cliche for a reason. Turns out, with all the money in the world and all the adventures, and you can, you know, skydive off 1,000 planes, but the true sign of like winning the jackpot in life is dying in your own bed, surrounded by your people, which is the most common situation in MAID, because people are given the choice of where they want that to happen and when they want that to happen. So it can also happen at a funeral home. I happen to work for a funeral home that offers a neutral space for people to receive MAID. And yeah, what it looks like is when death is able to be practiced with intention and isn't a surprise, people are able to incorporate what they believe in life into how they die. So, you know, maybe there's a living memorial. Maybe people are saying to you the eulogies that they would have spoken in death, and they get to say those things straight to your face. Maybe you're more private and you just want like your partner there. Maybe it's just a pet. Maybe it's just like your cat on your lap. Oh, what a dream. I should have died before Captain.
Yeah.
Too much to ask. But yeah, in practice, it looks fucking beautiful. It looks peaceful. It It's obviously hard for families. I've worked with families that are fully on board with their person's decision, and I've worked with families that are very much against and trying to wrestle with the reality of losing their loved one by their own choice. And then there's people in the middle. There's people that, this is causing me to lose sleep at night, but I know that this is what my dad has decided, and I'm going to respect his autonomy and his decision. So, I mean, from what I've seen, even families that struggle with supporting a loved one through a MAID provision usually come around in the end, once they've witnessed for months their person be steadfast in their decision. Maybe they've witnessed physical declines that have kind of made them realize how valid this option might be. But yeah, it just is a weird thing to say, but it is peaceful. It usually radiates love because people get an opportunity to say goodbye in a way that they don't normally. And like I said, from my personal experience, I have not met with too many clients who put it off, which would maybe imply that they're grappling with the decision process itself. It's very smooth the way that it's practiced here. And, you may hear that from the outside and think, does that mean it's done nonchalantly or a little too easily? And I don't think that's the case. I think that we're lucky to live in a place where in 2026, you can be supported through something like this if you choose to do it. And if you are to follow through with it, it is truly painless and peaceful and dignified.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's a perfect place to leave episode 1. I think we covered most of what we wanted to talk about. But yeah, that's been episode 1 of Death and Praxis. I'm Kieran.
I'm Charlotte.
And thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll keep doing this and you'll keep coming back. Really appreciate it. Have a good one.
Take care.